The One Punch Man universe is far deeper and more interesting than what you might think. And with Season 3 right around the corner, or possibly here depending on how much time this video takes to make, I thought it'd be the perfect opportunity to make this iceberg video. Now, this iceberg is mostly going to be covering stuff from the in-world lore of One Punch Man, especially in the deeper parts of the iceberg. But there are also some real-world or meta entries here. Also, I'm issuing a spoiler warning here. I'll try and make things as spoiler-free as possible, and I'm also going to issue spoiler warnings for specific entries up to level 3. However, from level 4 of this iceberg and onwards, consider the entire remaining iceberg to be full of spoilers, so proceed at your own risk. Let's get into it. Three versions. Let's kick it off with the basics. One Punch Man originally started as a gag webcomic series by an individual known as One, back in 2009, 16 years ago, Jesus Christ. Now, typically anime franchises have two versions, the manga version, which usually acts as the source material, and then the anime adaptation. Although many anime series actually start out as light novels, then get a manga and anime adaptation. One Punch Man, though, is a bit special in that it has two separate mangas. The original webcomic by One is still ongoing, however slowly, but there is also a quote-unquote official manga by Yusuke Murata that debuted in 2012, which is the main source material for the anime. So, throughout this whole video, I'll be referring to the original webcomic as the webcomic, and Murata's manga as the manga. Now, the manga does use the webcomic as its source material, but it also deviates quite a bit in a lot of instances, many of which we'll see in this iceberg. The okay meme. This is just a reference to a popular meme in which Saitama says, okay. The source of this meme is the 34th chapter of the manga or episode 11 of the anime. After Saitama breaks his armor, Boros mentions that his unimaginable vast power has been released, to which Saitama unenthusiastically replies using the iconic line. I remember this meme being pretty popular back in like 2016, 2017, and it actually remained popular for a while. Man, those were the days. Mob Psycho. This is referring to another one of One's works, Mob Psycho 100, which was also adapted into a manga and then an anime. The show has a lot of similarities with One Punch Man, focusing on espers rather than heroes, with the main character basically looking like Saitama but with hair, and also being a teenager. Both Saitama and Mob are absurdly strong in their own right, but they have key differences in their personalities. Saitama is mostly apathetic and bored, struggling to find any enjoyment in his daily life due to his unmatched strength. Mob, on the other hand, is empathetic, quiet, and struggles to control his emotions. He's a much more relatable character compared to Saitama. Mob Psycho has been described as more serious and emotional compared to One Punch Man. I'll be honest, I never actually watched it, but I'm inclined to after researching a bit. Someday for sure. Season 1 versus Season 2 animation. This refers to the steep drop in quality of the animation in Season 2 compared to Season 1. Season 1 was animated by Madhouse, a veteran studio that is known for animating tons of popular anime series. And they absolutely knocked it out of the park. I mean, Season 1 of One Punch Man was insanely good. And let's be honest, the quality of the animation, along with the great soundtracks and sound effects, is probably the biggest reason why this series became as popular as it is right now. The animation of Season 2 then passed to JC staff, and that's where the drama started. Now, to be clear, the quality of the animation did drop by a significant amount. That much is certain. But in my opinion, it wasn't really as bad as a lot of people claimed. And that basically describes the whole controversy. Everybody thought that the animation wasn't as good as it was in Season 1. It's just that the fanbase was split between people who were like, it's not as good but it's still pretty good, and people who were like, this is the worst thing ever, it's literally unwatchable. If you're asking me, the animation of Season 2 was fine enough. It wasn't great, but that didn't stop me from enjoying a lot of the action scenes, like Bang vs. Garo, Saitama obliterating Elder Centipede, and so forth. Though to be honest, this soundtrack had a pretty big role to play in this as well. Let's also clarify one more important thing. Yes, Madhouse did a great job with animating One Punch Man Season 1. However, the animation we got was not simply a result of their work. Tons of veterans in the industry came together to animate the first season. It was the big thing at the time. Even if Madhouse did reprise their role as animators for the One Punch Man anime, we probably still wouldn't get animation of that high caliber. That was a one and done thing for Season 1. But what do you guys think about the animation drama? Let me know down below in the comments. Season 3 is animated by JC's staff as well, so we'll see how that turns out. Saitama vs. Everyone. When the One Punch Man anime first released, it was extremely popular, so it stands to reason that people would start to throw Saitama in various hypothetical fights. The most popular ones were, of course, Saitama vs Goku, Saitama vs Superman, Saitama vs Thor, you get the drill. A cheap answer to all these questions is that Saitama would always win because he's a gag character, and so the point is that he always comes up on top, which is the lamest answer you could give if we're being honest. Now, I'm no power scaler, but the feats that we see in One Punch Man, while incredibly impressive, are nothing compared to the feats that we see in even more absurd media like Dragon Ball. In DBZ and even more so DBS, characters blow up planets for fun. They can destroy galaxies and even universes. That's the playing field you're standing on. So from a surface level point of view, there's no way that Saitama could even come close to matching the feats of characters like Goku or Beerus. However, there is actually more here than meets the eye, as Saitama's powers might not stop at just exceptional physical prowess. If later theories in the bottom of this iceberg are to be believed, Saitama might very well be able to defeat even opponents in the levels of Dragon Ball characters, but we'll talk about that much later on in this video. Alright, and that's it for the surface level stuff. These are tidbits of trivia that most of you are probably aware of. Now let's get into the more interesting stuff. Monster cells. In the One Punch Man manga and anime, monster cells are organic masses that, when consumed by a human, allow them to transform into monsters. They are one of the ways that humans can turn into monsters, and are basically used by the Monster Association in order to create more members. These cells are actually created by Monster King Orochi, the main baddie of the Monster Association. Here's the thing though, the monster cells don't actually exist in the original webcomic, one of the many differences between it and the manga. In fact, Orochi himself doesn't even exist in the original webcomic. Psychos was instead the leader of the Monster Association in the webcomic. One was, however, involved with the creation of Orochi for the manga. In fact, he was the one who hatched the idea, which Murata then illustrated. Saitama created the Hero Association. Okay, so it's not that Saitama directly went to found the Hero Association, but he was indirectly responsible for its creation. The Hero Association was created 3 years before Saitama completed his training. The founder of the association, a multi-millionaire named Agoni, was grateful when a passerby saved his grandson from being killed by a monster. Being moved by this act of kindness, he went on to create the Hero Association. You notice anything peculiar here? It's basically all but confirmed that the grandson of the Hero Association's founder is the very same kid that Saitama saved from Crablante at the beginning of his journey to become a hero. So yeah, Saitama is, in fact, the reason why the Hero Association exists, and he still gets placed at rank C. The supercontinent. One Punch Man takes place on Earth, but obviously it's a fictional version of Earth that's significantly different. There are no countries. Instead, the world is divided into massive cities with letter designations, aka A city, B city, and so forth. What's interesting is that in the Earth of One Punch Man, there aren't distinct continents, but rather a supercontinent, on top of which the cities are built. The world also contains smaller landmasses and islands. We get a glimpse at the supercontinent when Saitama is launched into the moon by Boros. And fun fact, the shape of the supercontinent is the exact same shape as the Saitama prefecture in Japan. Makes sense. The limiter. The limiter is a function that all humans possess in the world of One Punch Man, and we need to mention it since it's a key part of some of the trivia and theories we'll see down the line. The limiter is a natural limit that all humans possess, which halts their physical progress. It exists to prevent humans from getting destroyed by their own power, or from turning into mindless monsters drunk with power. It's also the explanation as to why Saitama is as strong as he is. According to Genus, the dude that was creating the animal monsters in Season 1, Saitama, through sheer force of will and immense hardship, was able to remove his limiter, which enabled his body to get stronger indefinitely, eventually leading him to become the unstoppable force that he is. Now keep in mind the way I phrased this. Saitama gets stronger indefinitely, because we do tend to think of Saitama having flat power, but there's actually several hints that Saitama is not just absurdly powerful, but also that he keeps getting even stronger. We'll get to that later. Boros is a parody of Goku. The more attentive of you might notice several similarities between Lord Boros, the big body of Season 1, and Son Goku, the protagonist. Oh, what am I saying? You all know who Goku is. First off, they're both aliens, so there's that. But more convincing is their appearance. Boros' first form has spiky hair that drop to the sides, similar to Goku in his base form. In his second form, after his armor was destroyed, his hair stands up and no longer drops to the side, which is similar to Super Saiyan Goku. And in Boros' third form, his hair elongates and drops all the way to his backside, which is clearly very similar to Super Saiyan 3. Aside from that, the reason why Boros invades Earth in the first place is because he saw a prophecy that foretold that he would meet a worthy opponent. He was looking for a good fight. Again, this could very well be a nod to Goku, who is also known for wanting to fight worthy opponents. The meteoric burst form might also be a nod to the Kaioken. Both are techniques that drastically improve one's physical abilities, but at the cost of extreme fatigue and damage to the body afterwards. Now, obviously as characters, they're very different. Goku being a just and pure warrior, while Boros being evil. Even more evil than telemarketers. But I think the theory that he's a parody of Goku holds ground. One Punch Man. One Punch Man is a popular children's picture book later adapted to an anime, in which the titular protagonist, who actually has an Anpan for a head, protects the world from his arch-nemesis, Biking Man. Taking one look at this character should be enough for you to understand why I'm mentioning him. Aside from being a satire of the played-out shonen genre, One Punch Man, or specifically Saitama, is clearly a parody of One Punch Man. Their costumes look almost exactly the same, with only the color scheme reversed, they both have bald, round heads, they're both superheroes, even their series names are almost identical, as One Punch Man is referred to in Japan as One Punch Man. Adding to that, Vaccine Man, the very first monster we see in the series, is probably a parody of Biking Man. I know that he looks almost exactly like Piccolo, and one might have used Piccolo's design to influence his creation of Vaccine Man, but thematically as well as color scheme wise, it fits that he's a parody of Biking Man, not Piccolo. Saitama's apartment. Saitama lives in an apartment within Z City, specifically in a neighborhood called the Ghost Town, since it's all but deserted by humans and is overrun with monsters. Saitama stays there because he doesn't have to pay any rent. Anyway, what's interesting about this building is that it's based off almost to a T to a real building in Setagaya, Tokyo. From what I gather, there's not any sort of special meaning for this building to the author or anything. It's probably just a random building he based his design around. And no, the real world place is not actually a ghost town overrun with monsters, in case you were wondering. Bonus chapters and omake. This is a reference to various bonus chapters that act as several small side stories in the One Punch Man universe, and they do a pretty good job at fleshing out the characters more and exploring their personalities and personal lives. For example, the Holiday Special chapter asks several characters what they'll be doing for Christmas. Saitama says he'll be eating udon, Metal Bat says he'll be taking his little sister to the theme park, and so forth. According to the One Punch Man fandom wiki, there are 43 bonus chapters so far. You should read them if you can, they're pretty fun. Omake, on the other hand, are one-page gag stories included with the manga volumes. For example, this one included in volume 6, where people are discussing Madame Shibabawa's death, the prophecy lady, while Metal Bat clearly has no idea who the hell Shibabawa is, even though she sounds really important. And then we see him focus his attention when somebody else asks who she is, so that he can be in the loop. They're pretty fun. Okay, so even mentioning the final 2 entries in the second tier counts as a spoiler for anime-only viewers. So this is your spoiler warning here. Though I will say that these 2 entries are crucial for several other entries that will come later on, so up to you if you want to keep watching. Skip to the next level of the iceberg using the timestamps if you don't want to get spoiled. 3, 2, 1. God. God is a seemingly malevolent entity in the One Punch Man universe and will likely serve as the overarching antagonist of the entire series. I'm introducing it here since it becomes crucial to several other entries in the iceberg later on. We don't know many things about God, but we do know that it is immensely powerful, far more powerful than any other villain in the series, it's presented as a massive humanoid creature made of flesh most of the times, though when Psychos had a vision about God, she saw it as a planet-sized sphere. God was able to turn a normal human, Homeless Emperor, into an incredibly dangerous dragon-level threat, simply by granting it some of its power. The way God operates is a mystery. It seems to appear on the moon in some visions, though we also see it residing in an alternate dimension. Another thing you might like to know is that, in the original webcomic, while God does exist, it's not nearly as prevalent in the story. In fact, we only see it 2 times, when it gives Homeless Emperor his powers, and when it takes them back. This can mean one of 2 things. Number one didn't intend on God being so prevalent in the story, which to be honest seems unlikely since God is so important in the manga, in which One also has a lot of involvement. Or 2, One is saving God for later in the story and doesn't want to make its presence as well known as it is in the manga. Honestly, God could have an entire video based on it, so let's move on to the last entry on this level, which is also tied with this one. Blast in the webcomic. There are several differences between the webcomic and the manga, but perhaps the most prevalent difference is the whole situation with Blast and God. In the manga, and presumably at some point the anime, Blast is actively looking for the mysterious cubes and is trying to prevent them from coming into contact with anybody. He is also actively fighting against God in the manga, and he even has comrades in other dimensions that do the same thing. Despite Blast being so important in the overall story, as well as being one of the major characters who resist what seems to be the overarching villain of the entire series, you might be surprised to learn that Blast in the webcomic is basically absent. Like God, Blast is almost non-existent in the webcomic. The only time we get to see a glimpse of his face was in Tatsumaki's flashback. Now, keep in mind that the manga and webcomic follow basically the same overarching story with the same arcs, albeit with several differences, which makes you wonder, what the hell is going on with the webcomic? It's possible that Blast and the Cubes will appear as a standalone arc instead of being peppered in several arcs like they are in the manga. I guess we'll have to wait and see, in approximately 25 years when the webcomic will be finally completed. Above Dragon. This entry is a reference to a fan-created disaster level of mysterious beings. Disaster levels are effectively a categorization given to a mysterious being, or generally any being that poses a threat to humanity. The category represents the magnitude of the potential threat. Let's take a quick look at the disaster levels. Wolf is the lowest and is given to beings that potentially endanger one or multiple human lives. Tiger is the second lowest and means that the being is a potential threat to a large number of people. Demon is the next level, which is given to beings that pose a threat to a whole city. Dragon is the semi-final level, which is given to beings that pose a threat to multiple cities. The most powerful villains we saw in the One Punch Man universe so far that were officially categorized were given the level of Dragon. And finally, God Disaster level is given to any being that threatens humanity's existence as a whole. Now, interestingly enough, we never got a monster that has been officially categorized as a God tier disaster level, even though several beings in the One Punch Man universe could easily fit this mark. I won't mention the manga spoiler ones, but Boros is a good example. It is clearly stated that his ultimate attack could wipe out the entirety of the Earth's surface, which is very clearly a humanity-ending level of attack. When one was asked what Boros' disaster level was, he said he was, quote, dragon or higher, end quote. And that statement created the controversy, with one side saying that this could very well mean God level, but one didn't outright mention it just to keep the suspense and intrigue going forward, while others say that this clearly means that disaster levels are a spectrum, which means that there's multiple tiers of a single level, which makes sense from a practical standpoint. Not all dragon tier monsters are of the exact same caliber. Either way, the above dragon term was created by the fanbase to give to beings that are clearly a cut above the standard dragon level threats, but not officially classified as god level threats. Interestingly enough, the term was actually used officially in the manga as well, but I won't spoil the scene here. Mosquito Girl is alive. Mosquito Girl is one of the earlier villains of the One Punch Man universe, appearing in Chapter 5 of the manga and Episode 2 of Season 1 in the anime. You might remember her from outright dismantling poor Genos, and just as Genos prepares to blow himself up and take her down with him, she gets obliterated by Saitama. Or so you'd think. It's revealed much later that it's actually her blood sac that got destroyed from Saitama's slap. Her main body survived, albeit barely. Dr. Genius, the man that created her, replaced her arms and legs with prosthetics, and she's now working at the House of Takoyaki alongside Genius and Armored Gorilla. Okay, so maybe you knew that. But did you also know that if you pay close attention during Saitama's slap, you can actually see Mosquito Girl surviving the slap and being blown away instead of exploding? Here, take a look. Anyway, she went from a blood addict to an honest working woman. Good on her for turning her life around. Amai Mask's true nature. Spoiler warning for this entry, as this information so far was only released in the webcomic, so skip to the time you see on your screen to skip it. Amai Mask is the #1 A-class hero in the Hero Association. He is known to project a friendly, polite, and idol-like personality on the outside, but is actually savage and merciless, brutally killing any and all monsters, even ones that are incapacitated or no longer pose a threat. He has a strong obsession with beauty and public image. So much so that he stubbornly retains his A-class position, even though he's powerful enough to be in S-class, in order to prevent other heroes he deems as quote-unquote unworthy to be promoted to S-class and ruin the class's reputation. Now, if you pay attention while watching or reading One Punch Man, you'll quickly come to realize that obsessions in this world are synonymous with monsters. Many monsters in the One Punch Man world started out as humans with very deep obsessions. Those obsessions eventually manifesting in a physical monstrous form. And you might be wondering, how is it that a person with such a deep and powerful obsession hasn't turned into a mysterious being yet? Well, it turns out he has. See, the Amai Mask we see in the story is actually a mysterious being. Amai Mask's real name is Butte. He was originally an extremely ugly human who wore a mask to hide his hideous face during his hero career. His deep obsession with his own ugliness and longing to be handsome manifested and created the beautiful, mysterious being we know as Amai Mask. What's great is that in the webcomic, Amai Mask had to expose his true face in front of a crowd in order to unlock his full power and deal with a monster that was about to kill civilians. He exposed his true self, knowing full well that the public would turn against him due to his hideous nature, in order to protect those same people that treated him with only disgust and fear. And it's then that he also earned Saitama's approval after doing this, with the Cape Baldy calling him really cool. Amai Mask is one of the coolest characters in the webcomic. You kinda dislike him at first, then you kinda hate him, and then you realize that he's actually a really awesome person. I hope they do him justice in the manga and the anime. Boros' prophecy. In the Alien Invasion arc, we learn the reason why Lord Boros decided to invade Earth. According to him, there was a prophecy that foretold that he would fight a worthy opponent that would push him to his limits. Now, our first inclination is to believe that this worthy opponent is of course Saitama, who did in fact push him to his limits and beyond. But there are a lot of people in the fandom that doubt that Saitama was actually the one the prophecy was referring to. For starters, Boros kinda regrets fighting Saitama. He was a strong opponent, yes, but he was too strong. It's like a decent tennis player matching against Federer. It's not a fun fight if you get absolutely stomped. The fight might have lasted a while, but Saitama was just throwing Boros a bone. So, in the end, you could argue that Boros didn't actually get the fight he deserved against an opponent of roughly equal strength. Instead, people believe that the prophecy referred to either Garo or Blast, two individuals that were roughly close to Boros' power, especially Garo, but we'll never know for sure. King's true power. We all know King, the 7th ranked S-class hero, a man with a frightening, scarred face and the famous King's engine that roars whenever he's ready to fight. A man who has been called the strongest man in the world. Of course, we later learn that all of this is utter nonsense. King is just an average random schmuck who accidentally gets all the credit for the work of other heroes, predominantly Saitama. King is just a nobody without any powers. Or so you'd think. One quote-unquote power that King shows throughout the entire series is luck. King is lucky. Very lucky. Perhaps supernaturally lucky. There's some in the community that believe that King's true power is a supernatural amount of luck that bends reality in a way that he won't be harmed or even exposed for his true nature, even when he tries to. There are so many instances where King should have been hurt or exposed, but things seem to play out in exactly a manner that make him come out unscathed. He's constantly saved by other heroes, again especially Saitama, nobody ever questions his strength, and even if they do, they usually end up changing their opinions by themselves. This has been jokingly referred to as King's stand, in a reference to JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, as such obscure and subtle powers are something that you see quite often with stands in JoJo's, as opposed to the One Punch Man universe where powers are more direct and in your face. Obviously this is most likely done for the sake of humor and not really given much thought or reason behind it, but it'd be cool if King's absurd record of coming through everything unscathed is actually the result of some deeper power. The Organization. The Organization is a mysterious faction with unclear goals and motives and is one of the many factions in the One Punch Man universe. Seriously, there are so many different groups in this series. They are a group comprised of robots and they are actually much more prevalent than what you might think, being in some way present throughout all sagas of One Punch Man. The first reference to them was all the way back during the first season. Hammerhead and the Paradisers stole some battlesuits from the Organization in order to cause mayhem, though it's actually revealed that the Organization let the Paradisers steal the battlesuits in order to collect data, and then went on to kill Hammerhead, who survived due to his thick skull. They were also in cahoots with the Monster Association, sending one of their robots to assist them when the Hero Association attacked. On the surface, their motives seemed to simply be to gain more battle data and increase their power as an organization, but they could have even more nefarious goals in mind. In the webcomic, they have several high-ranking robots called Machine Gods, many of which are ranked as Dragon Disaster levels and can take on S-class heroes. Now, I'll be mentioning some webcomic spoilers, so if you want to skip them, you know what to do. In the webcomic, we get a much better glimpse at the Organization. We were led to believe that Metal Knight was the one behind it. However, recent chapters have revealed that it wasn't actually him pulling the strings all along. And while we don't know exactly who is pulling the strings, we know that quote-unquote they and Bofoi, Metal Knight's true identity, are somehow connected. Pig God's hidden power. In both the manga and webcomic, S-class hero Pig God mentions that he has a hidden power which he's refrained from using thus far. He claims that he's saving this power for the quote-unquote very end. It's safe to assume that this hidden power is both exceedingly powerful and also a one-time use thing, or at least requires a lot of preparation to get ready. Pig God has refrained from using it even during the Monster Association arc, which means he's reserving that power for when it's absolutely necessary. Given Pig God's powers of digesting pretty much everything, the fact that we see him hoarding food as well as eating it all the time, I think it's safe to say that this quote-unquote ultimate move is probably releasing all that excess energy he stuffs himself with all at once. At first I thought this would mean that he would become slim and shriveled, and would have to spend years eating to regain all that expended energy. But funnily enough, we do see a slim version of Pig God in the manga, seemingly from overexerting himself during the Monster Association arc. So his ultimate move might be more than that. It might straight up incapacitate or even kill him. But what do you guys think Pig God's ultimate move is? Let me know down in the comments. Watchdog Man. There are so many heroes and generally interesting and powerful characters to keep track of in the One Punch Man universe that it stands to reason that some of the less prevalent ones can slip away in the background. Perhaps the most interesting one of them is Watchdog Man. If you've been paying attention, you'll realize that Watchdog Man is probably shaping up to be revealed as one of the strongest heroes in the entire universe. Perhaps even close to Saitama in terms of power. I know it sounds like a stretch, but let's take a look at the evidence. First of all, Watchdog Man is a hero who protects Q City and only Q City. He seems to be tied to this city specifically. The fact that he protects Q City of all places is important, since Q City is stated to have the highest average level of monsters out of all the cities. And still, we practically never see Q City in any sort of major trouble, because Watchdog Man always dispatches the monsters with ease. While we don't actually see Watchdog Man fight any really high level monsters like dragon level monsters, we can infer that he does on occasion, given that, again, Q City has the highest average level of monsters out of all the cities. We never once see Watchdog Man being in any form of struggle, let alone being seriously injured. We see him dispatch 30 monsters from the Monster Association with ease, and then absolutely pummel Garou without as much as breaking a single drop of sweat. Now granted, this was still at the beginning of Garou's journey, but keep in mind that by this time, Garou had already beaten Tank Top Master and had given Metal Bat a hard time, so he was by no means weak.
the way that One Punch Man is presented also gives us hints as to how powerful he will probably end up being. He has a lot of similarities with Saitama, both having vacant, blank expressions, both being bored easily, and crucially, both coming out almost completely unscathed from virtually any situation. Of course, we see much less of Watchdog Man compared to Saitama, but still, I think it's not a stretch to say that Watchdog Man is one of the most powerful S-class heroes, and I'm eager to see his strength in full. And with that said, let's move on to the 4th level of the iceberg. Now, because tons of entries from here on out are definitely going to be spoilers, I'm just going to issue a spoiler warning for the rest of the video for anime-only watchers. Cool? Let's get into it. Hey guys, something quick before we get into this level of the iceberg in earnest. So I realized that after a certain point during the recording, the audio for some reason became robotic and choppy. I have no idea why. I don't know if it was an issue with the audio drivers or maybe the recording software or perhaps even the mic itself. But the problem is that I didn't notice it after a good while of editing while I was using the choppy robotic audio recording. Now, after I caught wind of this, I did re-record all the rest of the audio. However, it would be a huge time waste to go back and re-edit all of the entries in the specific level that I already edited using the choppy robotic audio. So I'm really sorry, but you will have to contend with the choppy robotic audio for the majority of this level of the iceberg. If it really bothers you, feel free to skip to the next section using the timestamps below. This video is already taking too much time, much longer than anticipated, so I can't really afford to go back and re-edit all of the parts of this level that I edited before. I'm really sorry. Let's get into this level. Saitama was never average. We're starting this level off with a big one that'll play a role in many theories going forward. Let's roll back to Saitama's origins. We all know the story. Normal, depressed, unemployed dude sees a monster attacking a child, he finds the strength and determination from within him to save the child and defeat the monster, which sets him on the path of grueling training until eventually he becomes the strongest hero of all time. In the manga, after his fight with Tatsumaki, Saitama confesses to her that before he started his training, he couldn't even defeat a wolf-class monster.
That's a stone-cold lie.
I couldn't beat a wolf-class monster my ass. Crablante, the very first monster Saitama defeated, the monster that inspired him to start his hero training, was in fact confirmed to be a tiger-class monster. Now yes, Crablante could have been at the bottom of the tiger-class monsters, but still, for a quote-unquote average human being to defeat a tiger-class monster, that's actually very impressive. Consider that a high-level tiger-class monster like Combo Infinity was able to defeat 2 A-class heroes. And I understand that a disaster level isn't always the same with raw power, but I think we can all agree that the higher the monster's raw power, the bigger the potential danger it can pose to civilians. This ties into one persistent question I had since starting this series. Why only Saitama? If we agree on the premise of Saitama being just an average ordinary human before breaking his limiter, then why has nobody else been able to do the same thing? It's hard to believe that in a world of heroes and monsters, not one single person would push themselves as hard as Saitama. I know this statement is at odds with one of the fundamental philosophies of One Punch Man, that being that putting your life on the line and pushing yourself beyond your limits will bring extraordinary results, but it just doesn't make sense. Hence the theory that Saitama might well in fact be special. Maybe the limiter just can't be broken through sheer hard work and determination alone. Maybe Saitama had the correct potential, or maybe it's something deeper entirely. Boros will return. I'll keep this one brief. Boros is a fan favorite villain in the One Punch Man universe, being one of the very few beings that could give Saitama a half-decent fight. We assume that Boros was left to die in his crumbling spaceship, but in the webcomic we actually learn that Metal Knight has actually taken Boros and is keeping him alive inside a pod, which actually looks a lot like the healing pods in Frieza's spaceship, again strengthening the Boros-Goku connection. So it's possible that Boros will in fact make a second appearance in One Punch Man, though if I had to guess it will probably be his body only rather than his mind. Crazy as he is, I don't think even Bofoi would let a rampant Boros on the loose. We'll just have to wait and see though. The Bearded Man. This is a reference to this person right here, also known as Busho, I'm bringing him up because during the early days of One Punch Man, people were absolutely convinced that this dude was someone of great importance in the One Punch Man universe for some reason. To be fair, he was shown pretty frequently during the earlier arcs of One Punch Man, and a lot of people believe that he was actually Blast in disguise, secretly working as a staff member in the Hero Association. I guess to keep an eye on things? I mean, hey, you can't blame people for speculating. One Punch Man has the tendency to open tons of doors and either not close them or close them very far into the future, which obviously leads to a lot of fan speculation. Obviously, having seen Blast, we can say with 99.9% certainty that it's not this guy. Though they don't actually appear in the same room together as far as I'm aware, so you can't say for sure. And who's to say that one didn't plan for Busho to be some sort of important character but later changed his mind? Busho has not appeared as far as I know after the Monster Association arc, so he's been forgotten by the community. But I will always remember you, random bearded dude. Vaccine Man was created by God. Vaccine Man was the very first monster we see in One Punch Man and was an exceptionally powerful threat. Seriously, this guy just had the bad luck to run into Saitama. He was a dragon level threat and was possibly as powerful as the Cadres. Anyway, the theory is that Vaccine Man was actually created by God. This stems from his attacks, specifically the energy spheres he shoots. Though energy attacks are pretty common in the One Punch Man universe, these energy spheres seem to be associated with God and the powers that it grants. The most prevalent link being Homeless Emperor, to whom God directly gave the power to shoot these energy spheres. If that's not convincing enough for you, Murata himself confirmed that Vaccine Man's powers are the same ones as Homeless Emperor's. Vaccine Man even calls himself the quote-unquote Apostle of the Earth. The word Apostle might be more significant than initially thought. If we believe that Vaccine Man was in fact created by God, then this leads to a much grander and deeper theory regarding God's true nature and purpose. But I'll save that for a later entry in the last level. Blast's powers. Blast can manipulate space-time and is one of the most powerful characters in the series. He can open portals to other places in both the main universe as well as other dimensions, at least as far as we can see. But the origin of his powers is a complete mystery. There's usually some sort of explanation, far-fetched as it might be, for most of the powers we see in the story. Whether it's breaking your limiter, experimentation into psychic abilities, a gift from a higher being, cyborgification, or even just a good old 5x5 program. There's usually some sort of explanation as to why a character has the powers they have. But Blast's powers are actually never explained. We know that he had a scuffle with God 2 years prior to the beginning of the story, which is actually why Elder Centipede managed to escape him. But we also know that he has been fighting God for about 20 years. It's also stated that the only reason Blast was able to resist God was because of his powers to influence space-time. This means that, at the very least, Blast almost certainly had his powers for the past 20 years, meaning that they didn't come as a result of his recent scuffle with God, which again poses a question: where did he get his powers from? It should be noted that Blast's powers appear to be thematically opposed to God's powers. Blast's powers seem to be darkness-based, while God's granted powers have been light-based. The mystery remains to be solved. Taiyo-man and Makaino-san. This is a reference to two of One's other works, though much less known compared to One Punch Man and Mob Psycho. Taiyo-man is an idea that One had when he was much younger. It was about a guy with a flaming ball of fire as a head. It was never actually finished, but you can see how One used these characters as inspiration for One Punch Man. The main character, Taiyo-man, which literally translates to Sun Man or Solar Man, could be the basis for Saitama, whose bald head shines like the sun. The what seems to be main villain, I'm guessing represents the moon, and is clearly extremely similar in design to Lord Boros. Fun fact, Saitama is actually seen reading Taiyo-man in the manga, and is also seen reading some of One's other unfinished or lesser known work, like Tennis Player Ryu and Cockroach Busters. Now, Makaino-san is an actual webcomic series like One Punch Man, albeit much less known. It's about a family that lives in the underworld, and it is very, very weird. Fun fact, One actually stated that the main character, the middle-aged father of the family, is about as strong as golden sperm from One Punch Man. The Moonblade. During the Monster Association arc, the head of the Council of Sword Masters, Nichirin, gives Atomic Samurai a sword called the Sunblade. Apparently, this sword was forged in a continent that has long since sunk underwater. It was able to greatly enhance Atomic Samurai's power and also seems to have a mind of its own. According to legend, there exists a twin of the Sunblade, the Moonblade,
and when a swordsman wields both blades, they will gain unimaginable powers. We know almost nothing about the Moonblade, nor do we know how strong Atomic Samurai would be if he wielded both. Considering that he's already an S-class hero and the Sunblade gave him a significant power boost by itself, with just him wielding it for the first time, it could be assumed that he would become massively more powerful if he mastered both blades. That said, again, we have no idea where the Moonblade could be. Given that both blades were forged in a continent that has sunk, it might very well be that the Moonblade is actually underwater. It would also kind of make sense thematically since the ocean and the moon are often connected in literature and media. Or it could be that the Moonblade is actually on the moon itself. Again, at this point, we have no idea. Where do you guys think the Moonblade could be? Let me know down in the comments. Drive Knight is a villain. Drive Knight is one of the most enigmatic and shady characters in the series, and there's several subtle hints of information that point to the fact that he's actually a villain, and he could even be the Mad Cyborg, the one who destroyed Genos' hometown. Let's start with several evidence that point to the fact that Drive Knight is actually connected to the organization, the malicious group of robots that are trying to spread the seeds of chaos in the world. As I mentioned in their entry, the organization's primary focus seems to be collecting combat data from powerful beings, both heroes and monsters alike. And this is something that Drive Knight is shown to do all the time, particularly in the Monster Association arc. Drive Knight has been shown to observe several fights before deciding to step in, even letting heroes get savagely injured while he could have intervened. He seems almost obsessed with collecting battle data, even placing this duty above defeating monsters and saving lives. He insists on capturing the dragon level monster Nyan alive in order to run tests on it. Furthermore, when a robot from the organization G5 attacks Sekingar, Drive Knight does not intervene, claiming that he exhausted all of his energy. He seems to be awfully interested in the fact that the Hero Association has almost no protection during the Monster Association arc, indicating that he could be planning an attack. Another quality that Drive Knight consistently shows is that he wants people to be distrustful of Metal Knight. He wants people to think of Metal Knight as the enemy. And in fact, he plants this idea to Genos' head from very early on in the series, telling Genos that Metal Knight is his enemy. Now, spoilers ahead for the webcomic. Metal Knight isn't exactly a paragon of justice either. He's involved with several shady practices and doesn't exactly make an effort to appear as a good person. That said, in the webcomic, we do see that while he's a prick, he does have his own sense of justice. More crucially, we learn that he is not in control of the rampaging robots and that somebody or something else has taken control from him. We also learn that a certain someone has been after his brain for a long period of time. In the webcomic, Drive Knight again tries to convince Genos to side with him against Metal Knight. Genos goes to visit Dr. Xeno to ask him for advice, and after a short while, the organization invades Xeno's home and they kill him. We later see a grief-stricken Genos desperately trying to find and kill Metal Knight. And this could all have been an elaborate plan by Drive Knight to pin Genos against Metal Knight. Again, Drive Knight is the one who kept drilling the idea that Metal Knight is the enemy in Genos' head. This could have been a form of manipulation to get rid of two threats at once. We'll have to wait for the next chapters in the webcomic to know for sure, but it definitely seems that Drive Knight is very, very fishy. Alright, time to move on to the second to last level of this iceberg. Serious Fart. One of the most over-the-top moments of the earlier chapters in One Punch Man was Boros kicking Saitama so hard he landed on the moon. And of course then Saitama subsequently jumping from the moon back to the Earth. At the exact same spot, mind you. When asked what would have happened if Saitama didn't actually hit the moon from Boros' kick and instead was blasted off into empty space, Murata jokingly said that a quote-unquote serious fart would be enough to knock him back on course towards the Earth. Well, lo and behold, Serious Fart was actually made canon several years later. While Garo leaped through a portal trying to leave Saitama stranded on Io, Saitama quickly catches up to Garo, stating that he used the power of a fart he was holding inside him to propel him towards the portal. Of course, I want to make a small note that we never actually see Saitama pass through the portal itself. And while there's a 99.9999% likelihood that he did, just for fun, let's assume that he didn't actually catch up to the portal and he instead propelled all the way from Io to the Earth in a span of like 10 seconds, because he does appear behind Garo fairly quickly. Now, according to Google, the distance from the Earth to Io is, on average, 622.3 million kilometers. This means that Saitama would be far traveling around 62.8 million kilometers per second if he reached the Earth in 10 seconds. The speed of light is 299,792,458 meters per second. To adjust for kilometers, we just divide that by 1,000 and we get 299,792 kilometers per second. That means that Saitama would be far traveling around 209 times the speed of light to get from Io to the Earth in about 10 seconds, and that is the only canon I'm willing to accept. The ominous future still exists. Let's review the last part between Saitama's and Garo's battle. Garo gets influenced by God, becomes Cosmic Garo, and in an effort to rouse Saitama and have him get serious, he destroys Genos' core, which kills him. Saitama does get serious, Blast teleports them into space, their clash knocks them to Io, they fight, they return to the Earth, and Garo, emotionally broken and defeated, realizes that the quote-unquote radiation he was emitting while in cosmic mode accidentally killed Tareo. Filled with regret, Garo teaches Saitama how to turn back time and prevent all of this from happening. Saitama goes back in time, knocks Garo out before he can turn into Cosmic Garo, and prevents the ominous future from happening. And that's all well and good. Except, Genos' core actually has the memories of him being killed, which means that the ominous future wasn't entirely erased. And if we assume that One Punch Man functions with multiverse theory, which is kinda confirmed by Genos a bit later on, then this means that the dark timeline still exists. What Saitama did was create an alternate universe, kinda like how Trunks did in Dragon Ball Z and Super. That means that there still exists a timeline in which Garo has killed both Tareo and Genos, God takes back its powers and likely kills Garo in the process, as it did with Homeless Emperor, and crucially, Saitama doesn't exist. Because Saitama was the only one out of that alternate universe to exit it, go back in time and merge with the Saitama of that dimension, which means that he's no longer there. Yeah, and here you thought you had a pretty rough day. Imagine all of the poor souls that reside in that dimension. Murata's gift to Lee. Okay, I wasn't originally planning on including this in the iceberg, but it seems popular enough with the fanbase, so here it is. Lee is the name or alias of the moderator of the Chinese forum of One Punch Man. He has been very helpful and active in his role, translating many live streams from Murata, helping fans ask Murata questions about the manga, and even saving live streams and then providing them to Murata when the latter was looking for old live streams. So to thank him, Murata gave him two, I'm assuming personally drawn, images of Fubuki. One safe for work and the other one, not so much. Nice! Lee did post the safe for work one on his X account. I'm not gonna post it here, but I'll link to it if you want to see it. As for the not safe for work one, sorry guys, you'll just have to contend with the rest of the tens of thousands of lewd Fubuki images online. You naughty perverts. The moon. To put it briefly, something's off about the moon in One Punch Man. Several instances in the manga suggest a connection between the moon and God. In Homeless Emperor's vision, it appears to be looking down on him while standing on the moon. Now, during Saitama's battle with Garo, after Blast teleports them into space, we see this panel right here, which is obviously something that would grab our attention immediately. This is not the crater that Saitama left when he jumped to Earth. For one, it looks significantly different. This one is more deep and has what seems to be a spine in the center of it. Second, the moon is tidally locked with the Earth, meaning that it constantly faces the Earth from the same side. At least that's how it works in the real world. So the backside couldn't have been the one Saitama jumped from. It also didn't occur from Saitama and Garos' fight, as we clearly see the explosion taking place away from the moon. So what the hell is this crater? And what's up with the spine? Could it be God's real body? Tsukuyomi, the 11, and the Invisible Hand. These all refer to groups that are related with espers or psychics such as Tatsumaki and Fubuki, so I thought I'd make one entry for all of them. Tsukuyomi is the organization that experimented on Tatsumaki when she was a child. They make their official appearance after the Monster Association arc when Fubuki visits Psychos to discuss with her about her prophecy. Psychos was about to be sold off to Tsukuyomi by the Hero Association when Tatsumaki and Fubuki stepped in to stop them. Their agent used artificial psychic powers, but obviously he wasn't even close to a match for Tatsumaki. Still, we infer that Tsukuyomi is powerful both in terms of combat abilities and financial resources, as they gave the Hero Association a substantial amount of money for psychos. Now, interestingly, in the webcomic, things play out fairly differently. The organization that experimented on Tatsumaki obviously still exists, but from my recollection, they're never actually referred to by name. Somebody might want to correct me on that though. More importantly, they play no role in the post-Monster Association arc. In the webcomic, Tatsumaki herself was the one who wanted to kill psychos, deeming her too dangerous to live. I'm guessing that the addition of Tsukuyomi to the manga was partly done in order to make Tatsumaki a slightly more relatable and likable character, as she's just a couple steps away from being an actual villain in the webcomic. Though, to be fair, psychos joined forces with humanity's greatest enemy, the monsters, and has personally killed a staggering amount of people. So I don't think Tatsumaki is very much out of line for wanting to get rid of her permanently. Anyway, the Invisible Hand is a radical ESP group from Fubuki's school days. Both Psychos and Fubuki are aware of them, and they are mentioned in both the manga and the webcomic. The 11 are a mysterious group of Espers that are trying to create an Esper army, feeding psychic-inducing drugs to children. They might be affiliated with the Invisible Hand, and their leader is called Otento. They haven't yet been mentioned in the manga, though the manga hasn't caught up to the point in the webcomic where they're mentioned, so they'll probably be mentioned eventually. Suffice it to say that, with the way things are going, there's probably going to be a major Esper-related arc at some point, with Tatsumaki and Fubuki most likely playing major roles. Boros' fourth form. We know that Boros had 3 forms in the series. His first form was him sealing away his immense power behind his suit of armor, which Saitama then broke, with one punch, shockingly. His second form, or I guess you could say his normal form, is him with the armor off, now being able to use his powers in full. His third and final form is the meteoric burst form, which he uses as a last resort. It greatly increases his speed and power, but it also drains a lot of stamina and also causes a huge level of damage to his body. But interestingly, Murata actually seemingly wanted Boros to have a fourth form. He even drew a sketch of the form which I found on Reddit. Credit to King Cyronic in the One Punch Man subreddit for the post. The text below, when translated, reads as follows. Quote, I considered having him transform into a special body just before firing, but I felt it would look like he still had some energy left, so I decided against it. In one's version, he fires the weapon without any pause while still in tatters, which gives the impression of a final trump card, so I wanted to keep that feeling as much as possible. End quote. It seems like Murata initially wanted Boros to transform one final time before firing his collapsing star roaring cannon, but then decided against it to preserve the flow of the fight as intended by One. And while the fourth form looks pretty cool as a concept, I have to agree that it feels better for Boros to use his ultimate move as a last-ditch effort rather than simply having energy in reserve to transform. But hey, maybe we'll get to see Boros' fourth form when and if he gets resurrected. Tank Top Magic. The Tank Toppers are a group of tank top enthusiasts, with their leader being Tank Top Master, an S-class hero. The source of their powers and beliefs is basically a gag. They worship their tank tops and believe that they grant them power. Tank Top Master even has different tank tops for different situations, such as an attack specialized tank top which grants him extra power but requires him to finish off battles quickly. Keep in mind that the One Punch Man universe is a universe in which strong beliefs, desires, and obsessions manifest into reality. We see this happen all the time, especially with monsters. In fact, we see a very similar phenomenon to this one with Phoenix Man, who was originally a human who had to wear a Phoenix costume on TV and be constantly quote-unquote resurrected for the sake of comedy. Eventually, his strong hatred for the costume and his work monsterized him and the suit fused to his body, giving him the actual powers of resurrection. So, while it's a gag, it's actually very possible that the Tank Toppers' collective belief in the power of the Tank Tops actually manifested into reality. The Tank Top probably does, in fact, hold power in the universe of One Punch Man. It's possible that when Tank Top Master wears his ultimate Tank Top, and he fully and utterly believes in the power of the Tank Top, that his maximum strength will be released and he will be nigh unstoppable. Saitama is attracting God. This is something that I'm sure a lot of people in the fanbase have thought about, and I'd like to share my thoughts on it. Because the truth is, we do get quite a bit of hints that Saitama is actually responsible for God being more prevalent now compared to before. First of all, let's start with the evidence that God is actually more active now compared to a couple of years before the beginning of the story. While we do know that God was at least in some way present for a long while now, considering that Blast's main mission was to oppose it, this was mostly through its connection with its mysterious cubes. The earliest instance we know of God directly appearing or influencing someone was during Blast's fight with Elder Centipede. Since the Elder Centipede event roughly 2 years ago, God has been shown to act more directly. It gave Homeless Emperor his powers without him ever touching a cube. It also directly communicated with Garo to make him its avatar. Both of these instances were in the recent past and the present. Another hint that God is becoming more prevalent is the fact that intelligent monsters seem to be popping up more and more in recent years, as stated by Amai Mask. So there's a very high likelihood that God is becoming more and more active in the actual world of One Punch Man. And I believe the reason for this is Saitama, or more specifically, the limiter breaking. If we accept the premise that God is the one who imposed the limiter on humans, then it stands to reason that it wouldn't be happy if a human managed to break it. It could see that as an affront to its power and authority and would likely want to dispose of the being responsible. Blast even mentions to Sage that God is becoming more and more involved lately, and it's pretty much all but confirmed that Saitama is the one that is attracting it here. Now, putting a bow tie on this theory is the timeline of events that seems to coincide with all the facts we know so far. We know that Saitama trained intensely for 3 years prior to the beginning of the story. We also know that around 1.5 years after the beginning of his training, his hair started to fall out and he gained immense powers. Saitama himself makes it seem like these two events happened at the same time, so we'll treat it as such. And this is likely the point at which the limiter broke, or at least the point at which it started to break. Because the breaking of the limiter might not be a sudden process, but rather a gradual one. But that's besides the point. Saitama breaking his limiter seems to coincide very well with the first known instance of God physically appearing in the world. Of course, that being when it saved Elder Centipede from Blast. Sitch says that this occurrence happened 2 years ago. Now, by that point in the manga, around 2 months have passed since Saitama joined the Hero Association. Unfortunately, we don't know how much time elapsed between Saitama completing his training and him joining the Hero Association. But if we assume that that time period was at least a couple months long, then God's first appearance can easily coincide with Saitama's breaking of the limiter, because that would place that instance around 2 years before Sitch talks to the other heroes about Blast and God. Which then begs the question, why doesn't God just go after Saitama directly and instead chooses to strengthen its position through creating monsters and imbuing people with powers? Well, it's likely that it can't fully intervene directly and only chose to be more prevalent now because it felt that a limiter has been broken. It's also likely that God doesn't actually know who Saitama is on a personal level. It probably just senses that the limiter has been broken by somebody, but doesn't exactly know who. Or I should say, didn't know who. Because it's highly likely that God now knows who Saitama is after his fight with Garo, which God was clearly watching. As to what will happen from here on out, we'll just have to wait and see. Garo accepting God. We're wrapping up the penultimate tier with another big one. Let's go back to Garo's and God's interaction in the manga. Garo is outmatched by Saitama even in his fully monstrous form. It's at this point that God intervenes and, disguised as Bank, offers to help Garo. Garo then returns having undergone his final transformation, influenced by God's power. Thing is, we learn in the next chapter that Garo actually rejected God. He realized that it wasn't actually his former master that was communicating with him, and so he slapped its hand away. But God still imbues Garo with power, which at first glance seems like a contradiction to how God worked thus far. To receive God's power, you actually had to accept it, either by reaching out to God internally the way Homeless Emperor did, or by touching a mysterious cube and then accepting God's help. Which begs the question, why did God imbue Garo with powers if Garo rejected it? There's two possible scenarios that I can come up with. The first is the surface level scenario. God itself says that simply touching its hand for a short moment is enough to allow it to have influence over Garo, in spite of the fact that Garo rejected it. While from a practical standpoint this makes sense, it's also kind of a shallow and convenient explanation. I think the whole thing is meant to be more spiritual in nature. The second scenario is the one that I prefer. I think Garo didn't fully reject God after all. Sure, Garo is rebellious and arrogant by nature, and probably wouldn't want another being's help under normal circumstances. But keep in mind that in this instance, Garo was being pummeled by someone who didn't even remember existed. He was so close to becoming this quote-unquote absolute evil, only for his dream to be crushed at the last minute by what seemed to be a random nobody. Garo was both enraged and in despair, so it's not too much of a stretch to say that he could, even for a fleeting moment, consider accepting God's help. And I think that's what God meant when it said that Garo barely touched its hand. It might not refer to the physical act of touching it, but rather the fact that Garo was not steadfast in rejecting God. And that's all God needed to make Garo its avatar. Garo even clearly looks up and thanks God when he transforms. In my opinion, Garo, deep down, accepted God's help, even if on the surface it seemed like he didn't. Now that's it for the manga, but this is actually 2 entries mixed in one, so let's talk about the webcomic next. Even though God is barely a thing in the webcomic, there are some people who believe that Garo also accepted God's help in the webcomic, only more subtly. This series seems to have at least some merit. First, Garo longingly looks at the moon while he's lying completely exhausted and on death's door. He laments on how in the end, maybe he's just another human. This happens as the moon fully reveals itself behind some clouds. The very next time we see Garo, a few panels later, he's standing in front of the moon, transformed again, with his injuries seemingly healed. We know that the moon is closely tied to God in the manga, so this could be a subtle hint that God intervened in the webcomic as well. We also get the thank you panel from Garo in the webcomic when he transforms for the final time. Though it should be noted that it's not as clear in the webcomic if he's actually looking up as it is in the manga, still, these 2 pieces of evidence might point to the subtle influence of God even in the webcomic. On the other hand, you have to remember that God was barely a concept in the webcomic at that point, so it's also likely that one just didn't actually think that far, and that all of these aspects are just a big coincidence. But what do you guys think? Do you think Garo accepted God's help in the webcomic, or is it just me hyper-analyzing a satirical gag webcomic? Let me know down in the comments. Alright, and with that out of the way, let's move on to the 6th and final level of this iceberg video. This level only has 4 entries, but all of them are pretty big, so buckle yourselves up. We're nearly at the end. One Punch Man is based on Egyptian mythology. Oh boy, where do I start with this one? This very complicated theory is made popular by YouTuber Jonin. Now, I'm not sure if he's actually the one who originally came up with it, although it seems very likely. I'm not gonna go over it in detail because A, that would take too long, and B, I don't want to just regurgitate another person's work. So if you want to check out the theory in full, Jonin made a compilation video which includes all the different videos that he made about this theory. I'll link that video in the description. Here are the cliff notes. Basically, this theory hinges on the idea of symbolism and influence of Egyptian mythology being prevalent in the entirety of One Punch Man. The theory goes that ultimately the story of One Punch Man is the sun versus the moon. Or you can more broadly interpret this as the light versus the darkness. Saitama represents Ra, god of the sun, which fits with Saitama's presentation in the One Punch Man series. He has a bald shiny head, which could be interpreted as a cheeky allusion to the sun. He's often depicted with the sun behind him. He's literally based on Taiyo Man or Sun Man, which we mentioned in a previous entry. God, the overarching antagonist of the story, represents Osiris. Though to be fair, the similarities between God and Osiris aren't as obvious or prevalent as the similarities between Saitama and Ra. God is typically associated with the moon, but Osiris isn't actually primarily associated with the moon, though he is to a certain degree. Osiris represents the afterlife, death, resurrection, which can be attributed to God to some extent. He is also depicted with a green skin, and in the manga, we get a colored page depicting God with a sort of greenish flesh. There's also more symbolism to be found, such as the Eye of Ra, the right eye, and the Eye of Horus, the left eye. Jonin makes the claim that several key villains have some sort of uniqueness to their eyes, more commonly having one eye, which supposedly alludes to the Eye of Horus, to represent the fact that they're enemies. Though, to be fair, in Egyptian mythology, at least as far as I understand, the Eye of Horus isn't actually associated with evil at all. Many other religions and mythologies around the world believe in the quote-unquote evil eye, so it could be based off of that. There's a lot more to this theory, such as Psychos being a reference to Isis who resurrected Osiris, much like Psychos tried to, I guess, restore God in a sense. Like I said, it's a big theory, so check out the video if you want to hear it in full. I do agree with some aspects of this theory. Other details I think are a bit far-fetched. I think we're reaching a little bit with some of the supposed similarities. Now look, there's no such thing as a completely and utterly unique story. authors and writers take inspiration from various sources like religion, mythology, and of course, other works of either reality or fiction. I do think that One was possibly inspired by Egyptian mythology. I don't think that it's too much of a stretch to think that. The question is, to what extent? Jonin himself pointed out several times that obviously this isn't a one-to-one retelling of Egyptian mythology. Rather, One is simply drawing basis and inspiration from it and will follow a similar story in the broader sense, but obviously with a lot of details being different to match One Punch Man. But what do you guys think? Do you think that One Punch Man closely resembles and follows Egyptian mythology, or do you think that One is simply drawing some loose inspiration from it, but doing something fairly different? Let me know down in the comments. God is rewriting the story. This is a meta theory that fans came up with to explain a very prevalent and unfortunate problem in the official manga: constant rewrites and retcons. Here's some context. Yusuke Murata is notorious for constantly redrawing certain chapters or pages in the manga. A prevalent example is the Child Emperor vs Phoenix Man fight that spanned for a couple of chapters. Now, as you can imagine, delaying the progression of the story just so you can redraw various chapters that you think aren't as good as they should be, or changing up details, isn't exactly going to win you many friends. But that's only half the story, because the more important factor here is the fact that the redraws oftentimes change details and facts in the story, some of which are fairly significant. For example, in the aforementioned Child Emperor vs Phoenix Man fight, in the now retcon chapters, this is a standard fight. Child Emperor is always on the back end, even with his ultimate weapon unleashed, but he manages to scrounge up a victory by sneaking a tickleback inside Phoenix Man's costume and then causing him to asphyxiate from laughter. In the canon chapters, however, the middle of the fight is very different. Phoenix Man transports Child Emperor into a sort of dream dimension somehow. They have talks about what it means to be a hero, how the association is corrupted. Fucking Saitama somehow enters the dimension and chastises Phoenix Man. The fight ends similarly to the non-canon chapters, but it plays out very differently. Another major instance of retconning is with Blast's partner, Empty Void. In the retcon chapters, Empty Void had a whole backstory as to how he came to be Blast's partner, that he was only pretending to want to go against God in the beginning, how he sent his sister to spy on Blast and eventually his sister and Blast got married and had a kid, how his sister allegedly died during a battle with an avatar of gods. None of this is really present in the canon chapters. In the canon chapters, Empty Void's backstory isn't elaborated on, nor does he seem like the cold, calculating person he was in the retcon chapters, even showing remorse for putting the ninjas through the cruel training. Blast even stated that that was only the result of God's influence, which, from what I understand, isn't actually true in the retcon chapters, and Empty Void had been training students from before he was influenced by God. In fact, you could say that the redraws cause enough differences that there are actually two versions of the manga, the canon timeline and the retcon timeline. And herein comes the theory. Fans have jokingly been saying that all of these retcons and redraws are actually God itself influencing the story and creating more favorable circumstances in order for it to win. We can assume that God has an influence over time and space, given how Garo can influence them when he receives God's power. So all of these retcons could be the result of God messing with the timelines and creating alternate universes. It sounds silly, and frankly it is silly, but it'd be wild if near the end of the manga we get to see all of these different alternate versions of events coming to play for the final fight. God is the Earth. Let's divert our attention back to the very first villain of the series, Vaccine Man. We've already established that Vaccine Man shares the same powers as Homeless Emperor, as stated by Murata himself. This very strongly suggests that Vaccine Man was, in fact, created by God. Yet Vaccine Man himself claims that he was quote-unquote born from the Earth as a result of humans polluting the planet. Of course, it's possible that Vaccine Man is simply mistaken and just believes that he was created by the Earth, while in reality he was created by God itself. Still, he instinctually wants to rid the planet of humans. A similar situation happens with Sage Centipede. Now, Sage Centipede is clearly acting on God's behalf. It wants to destroy the quote abominable fist that turned against God, end quote. I wonder who that could be. It also states that it wants to execute quote unquote divine retribution. Both of these statements present a clear connection to God. And yet, Sage Centipede also states that it's a reincarnation of its quote unquote father, the Earth. It also refers to evil natural water as its sister, a reincarnation of their quote-unquote mother, the ocean. Which brings up the question, what does Sage Centipede mean when it refers to the Earth as the father and the ocean as the mother? It's clearly affiliated with God, so does it perceive God to be the Earth itself? If God is the Earth itself, then it would strongly suggest that there are in fact two or more gods. Because God is also often associated with the moon in One Punch Man. We see a giant spine in the moon. We also see God's figure looking down from the moon. It could be that God is actually a title shared by the manifestations of planets and moons. But personally, I don't think this is the case. The way it's presented, it seems that Blast and his teammates are cooperating throughout dimensions to fight a single entity. So I think the more likely scenario here is that God is a being that transcends planets. Though if it's a being separate from the planet, then it can be assumed that the Earth is quote-unquote cooperating with God. God and the Earth seem to have a shared interest of wiping out humanity. That's the only logical explanation I can come up with as to why beings that are affiliated with God also seem to think that they're acting on the Earth's behalf. Perhaps the universe itself rejects humanity, and at the helm of that rejection is the being known as God, influencing even whole planets to create monsters to destroy the human race, on every dimension and every universe. Okay, and we finally arrive at the final entry in this video. As promised, let's get into it. Saitama's true power. Saitama has seemingly one of the most basic and simple powers in all of One Punch Man, and hell, in all of media. He is just an unimaginably physically capable dude. He has immense power, speed, precision, even control in his power output. He is just a gag character who's made to be absurdly powerful in order to create a unique and fun narrative, and that's all you need to know or look into regarding his powers. And that's all well and good. Except, we are getting a lot of hints in the story that there's actually more to Saitama's power than what meets the eye. We've already established that Saitama was at least somewhat strong before he started his training, or at least we made that speculation. He defeated a tiger-class monster by himself, with no established prior physical training. There is one aspect of Saitama's power that is almost guaranteed at this point, and it's this. Saitama is still getting stronger. I, and I'm assuming many others watching the show or reading the manga, assume that Saitama's power was flat. He trained for 3 years, broke his limiter, gained immense power, and now he just remains at this huge power level without any fluctuations. We naturally assume that since we didn't have any reasonable way to actually measure his maximum capabilities. The biggest and most obvious giveaway that Saitama is getting even stronger came in the manga during Saitama's and Garo's fight. The narrator here is clearly stating that due to the surge of emotions Saitama felt during that battle, his power had raised exponentially. At the beginning of the fight, Garo was able to somewhat keep up with Saitama. He was also copying all of his moves, so it was kinda like Saitama was fighting himself. But by the end, the gap between them had grown so much that Garo wasn't anywhere close to Saitama's level. Saitama had been serious from the start of the fight in Ayo, so it's not like he was particularly holding back and just gradually started to release more power. He simply got stronger during the fight. I also noticed a certain paragraph from the narrator that I found interesting. Quote, his, Saitama's, rate of growth, which had gone unnoticed by anyone since there was nobody remotely on par with his strength, suddenly began to soar exponentially. End quote. Notice how it says that his rate of growth went unnoticed. This strongly implies that Saitama was still getting more powerful, even before his fight with Garo. His growth became much more rapid during the fight, presumably due to a combination of exerting himself more, as well as having a strong surge of emotions. But the implication here is that Saitama was continuing to improve even before his fight with Garo. We have another piece of evidence for this claim, which comes from a very odd place. One of the One Punch Man audiobooks titled Geno's Training. In this audiobook, Dr. Kuseno develops a device called the virtual... I don't want to get demonetized in case this video does well, so I'm just going to call it the Virtual No-No Simulator, or just VGS for short. Cool? So the VGS is a device which reads the user's brainwaves and also downloads their data and combat abilities. It can simulate battles between users and monsters or even other users by creating digital versions of them called ghosts. These ghosts apparently have the same combat abilities as the real entities. Now, long story short, Genos uses the VGS and creates a ghost of himself. He trains with the ghost and then sets the ghost to fight Saitama. Shockingly, Saitama wins, and the VGS records Saitama's abilities. Now, the next day, Saitama enters the VGS a second time to fight with his own ghost. Now, at this point, something weird yet simultaneously expected happens. Saitama beats his own ghost with a single punch. Now, this can mean one of two things. Either the VGS is simply not accurate and didn't register Saitama's abilities correctly in the first place, or Saitama has grown more powerful since his last use of the VGS. Now, it could very well be the former. Saitama himself questions the validity of the VGS and its ability to accurately measure a person's abilities. We also see the VGS make mistakes with other heroes, such as not taking Zombie Man's regenerative abilities into account or Metal Bat's fighting spirit. On the other hand, we already know that Saitama is in fact getting stronger, so it could also be the latter, which is what Genos seems to think as well. But Saitama's continuing growth is far from the only interesting aspect to his power. To put it blatantly, Saitama can do things he should absolutely not be able to. Look, I can't believe that you're strong enough to jump from the moon to the earth, or that your sneeze has enough power to blow away half of a moon. But when you start grabbing actual portals, that's when we have a problem. It's been shown time and time again that Saitama can do things that physical prowess alone should simply not enable him to do. Like I said, he can physically grab and even kick Garo's portals. He could somehow enter Phoenix Man's personal dimension. His fists can negate God's influence on a person, which is shown twice. First on Garo and second on Empty Void. And this isn't necessarily a matter of strength either. You could say that Saitama beat God out of Garo, yes, but he wasn't anywhere near to going all out against Empty Void. He just nonchalantly punches him down, and that's enough to get rid of God's influence. Blast himself notices this and ponders what Saitama's actual powers are. So, we know that Saitama's true powers are not as simple as being the pinnacle of physical abilities. Which begs the question, what the hell is he and what are his powers? Well, if you believe the Egyptian mythology theories or many other theories, then Saitama is an actual god, a reincarnation of a god perhaps. Or maybe he ascended to being a god after removing his limiter. Maybe Saitama is even higher up the food chain than a god. At least higher up than the god we meet in the story. Whether he was someone who was quote-unquote destined to become like that, or just an ordinary person who reached that height due to effort alone, that remains to be seen. This is why in my Saitama vs everyone entry, I said that while in terms of feats Goku outclasses Saitama by a huge margin so far, Saitama's seemingly limitless potential could allow him to eventually catch up to Goku, or basically pretty much anyone and everyone, and come out on top. Saitama literally has no limits. And I should make something very clear. This aspect of his that he's able to do things that physical prowess should not enable him to do is only regarding the manga, and obviously the anime that will be following it. We've already mentioned numerous times in this video how the webcomic and manga have several differences. And while the overall story arcs in the broader sense have been the same thus far, I think it's clear that the manga is trying to tell a significantly different story compared to the webcomic. In the webcomic, at least so far, Saitama does in fact seem to be simply a physically overpowered dude with no deeper meanings behind his strength, which I think is the whole point of his character and how one wanted Saitama to be in the first place. I don't think one had any plans to make Saitama some sort of special person, but the manga is showing a different version. There's a deeper meaning to his powers, a mystery to be unraveled. Whether or not one agrees with this direction the manga has taken, that I don't know. But ultimately, I think we'll end up with two different versions of Saitama. As to which one is better, I'll leave that up for you to decide. Alright, and we are officially done. Guys, there's bound to be some things that maybe I missed, or maybe even some errors I made while making this video. I tried my best to research as much as I could, but One Punch Man is a surprisingly deep series, and with 3 or basically 4 different versions, it's kinda hard to keep track of it all. In any case, let me know if there are interesting entries or facts that I missed. Also make sure to let me know what else you'd like to see an Iceberg or deep dive video about. It could be another anime, a series, a video game. I plan to make Iceberg videos for a lot of different nerdy stuff, so make sure to serious punch that subscribe button if you want to stay up to date. I have been Nerd Dive, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.